Hi. All right. I think we're on part 6 of this, chapter 2 of the actual book. Made no real great dent in it, which means that we've got so much more to read. The next book I'm gonna do is gonna be a way easier book. Okay? Anyways. Though I felt faint and wanted to sit down, somehow I kept hobbling along with the hitch in my step like a partially broken toy. Cops gestured. Cops whistled and beckoned. Water dripped off the end of my nose, over and over, blinking the rain from my eyes. The thought coursed through my mind. I had to get home to my mother as soon as I could. She could be waiting frantically for me at the apartment. She would be tearing her hair out with worry, cursing herself for having taken my phone. Everyone was having problems getting their calls through, and pedestrians were lying 10 and 20 deep at the few payphones on the street. Mother, I thought, mother, trying to send her a psychic message that I was alive. I wanted her to know I was all right, but at the same time, I remember telling myself it was okay I was walking instead of running. I didn't want to pass out on the way home. How lucky that she had walked away only a few moments before. She had sent me directly into the heart of the explosion. She was sure to think I was dead. And to think of the girl who'd saved my life made my eyes smart. Pippa, an odd, dry name for a rusty, wry little redhead. It suited her. Whenever I thought of her eyes on mine, I felt dizzy at the thought that she, a perfect stranger, had saved me from walking out of the exhibition and into the black flash in the postcard shop. Nada, the end of everything. Would I ever get to tell her she saved my life? As for the old man, the firemen and rescue people had rushed the building only minutes after I got out, and I still had hopes that someone had made it back in to rescue him. The door was jacked. They knew he was in there. Would I ever see either of them again? When I finally made it home, I was chilled to the bone, punch drunk and stumbling. Water streamed from my sodden clothes and wound behind me in an uneven trail across the lobby floor. After the crowds on the street, the air of desertion was unnerving. Though the portable television was going in the package room, and I heard walkie-talkies sputtering somewhere in the building, there was no sign of Goldie or Carlos or Jose or any of the regular guys. Farther back, the lighted cabinet of the elevator stood empty and waiting, like a stage cabinet in a magic act. The gears caught and shuddered one by one. The pearly old deco numbers blinked past as I creaked up the 7th floor. Stepping into my own drab hallway, I was overwhelmed with relief. Mouse brown paint, stuffy carpet cleaner smell and all. The keys turned noisily in the lock. "Hello?" I called. Stepping into the dimness of the apartment, shades drawn, all quiet. In the silence, the refrigerator hummed. God, I thought, with a terrible jolt, isn't she home yet? Mother, I called again. With rapidly sinking heart, I walked fast through the foyer, and then stood confused in the middle of the living room. Her keys weren't on the peg by the door. Her bag wasn't on the table. Wet shoes squelching in the stillness. I walked through to the kitchen, which wasn't much of a kitchen, only an alcove with a two-burner stove facing an air shaft. There sat her coffee cup. Green glass from the flea market, with a lipstick print on the rim. I stood staring at the unwashed coffee cup with an inch of cold coffee at the bottom and wondered what to do. My ears were ringing and whooshing, and my head hurt so badly I could scarcely think. Waves of blackness at the edge of my vision. I'd been so fixed on how worried she would be on making it home to tell her that I was okay, that it had never occurred to me that she might not be home herself. Wincing with every step, I walked down the hallway to my parents' bedroom. essentially unchanged since my father had left, but more cluttered and feminine-looking now that it was hers alone. The answering machine on the table by the tumbled and mused up bed was dark, no messages. Standing in the doorway, half reeling with pain, I tried to concentrate. A jarring sensation of the day's movements jolted through my body as if I'd been riding in a car for far too long. First things first, find my phone, check my messages. Only I didn't know where my phone was. She had taken it away after I was suspended the night before. When she was in the shower, I'd tried to find it by calling the number, but apparently she'd turned it off. I remember plunging my hands into the top drawer of her bureau and clawing through a bewilderment of scarves, silks, and velvets, Indian embroideries. Then, with immense effort, even though it wasn't very heavy, I dragged over the bench at the end of her bed and climbed onto it so I could look on the top shelf of her closet. Afterwards, I sat on the carpet in a semi-stupor with my cheek leaning against the bench and an ugly white roar in my ears. Something was wrong. I remember raising my head with a sudden blaze of conviction. With a sudden conviction that gas was seeping out of the kitchen stove, that I was being poisoned from a gas leak, except I couldn't smell any gas. I might have gone into the little bathroom off her bedroom and looked into the medicine cabinet for aspirin, something for my head. I don't know. All I know for sure is that at some point I was in my room, not knowing how I got there, bracing myself with one hand against the wall by the bed and feeling like I was going to be sick. And then everything was so confused I can't give a clear account of it at all until I sat up disoriented on the living room sofa at the sound of something like the door opening. But it wasn't the front door. Only somebody else down the hall. The room was dark, and I could hear afternoon traffic, rush hour traffic, out on the street. In the dimness, I was still for a heart-stopping moment or two as the noises sorted themselves out and the familiar lines of table lamp, lyre-shaped chairbacks grew visible against the twilight window. "Mom?" I said, and the crackle of panic was plainly inaudible in my voice. I had fallen asleep in my gritty, wet clothes. The sofa was damp, too, with a clammy, body-shaped depression where I'd been laying on it. A chilly breeze rattled in the Venetian blinds. Through the window my mother had left partly open that morning. The clock said 6:47 p.m. With growing fear, I walked stiffly around the apartment, turning on all the lights, even the overhead lights in the living room, which we generally didn't use because they were so stark and bright. Standing in the doorway of my mother's bedroom, I saw a red light blinking in the dark. A delicious wave of relief washed over me. I darted around the bed, fumbled for the button on the answering machine, and it was several seconds before I realized that the voice was not my mother at all, but a woman my mother worked with, sounding accountably cheerful. "Hi, Audrey, Prue here, just checking in. Crazy day, eh? Listen, galley proofs are in for Pareja, and we need to talk, but the deadline's been postponed, so no worries for now anyways. Hope you're holding up. Love. Give a call when you've got a chance." I stood there for a moment, looking down at the machine after the message beeped off. Then I lifted up the edge of the blinds and peeked out at the traffic. It was that hour, people coming home. Horns honked faintly down the street. I still had a splitting headache, and the feeling, new to me then, but now unfortunately all too familiar, of waking up with a nasty hangover, of important things forgotten and left undone. I went back to her bedroom, and with trembling hands punched in the number of her cell phone so fast that I got it wrong and had to dial again, but she didn't answer. The service picked up. I left a message. "Mom, it's me. I'm worried. Where are you?" I sat on the side of her bed with my head in my hands. Cooking smells had begun to drift from the lower floors. Indistinct voices floated in from neighboring apartments, abstract thumps, somebody opening and shutting cabinets. It was late. People were coming home from work, dropping their briefcases, greeting their cats and dogs, children, turning on the news, getting ready to go out for dinner. Where was she? I tried to think of all the reasons why she might have been held up and couldn't really come up with any. Although who knew? Maybe a street somewhere had been closed off so she couldn't get home. But wouldn't she have called? Maybe she dropped her phone, I thought. Maybe she broke it. Maybe she gave it to someone who needed it more. The stillness of the apartment unnerved me. Water sang in the pipes, and the breezes clicked treacherously in the blinds. Because I was just sitting uselessly on the side of her bed, feeling like I needed to do something, I called back and left another message, this time unable to keep the quiver out of my voice. Mom, forgot to say I'm at home. Please call the second you get a chance, okay? Then I called and left a message on the voicemail at her office, just in case. With a deadly coldness spreading in the center of my chest, I walked back into the living room. After standing there for a few moments, I went to the bulletin board in the kitchen to see if she had left me a note, though I already knew very well she hadn't. Back in the living room, I peered out the window at the busy street. Could she have run to the drugstore or the deli, not wanting to wake me? Part of me wanted to go on the street and look for her, but it was crazy to think I would spot her in rush hour crowds. And besides, if I left the apartment, I was scared I'd miss her call. This is so awful. It was past time for a doorman to change shift. When I phoned downstairs, I was hoping for Carlos, the most senior and dignified of the doormen, or even better, Jose, a big, happy Dominican guy, my favorite. But nobody answered at all, for ages, until finally a thin, halting, foreign-sounded voice said, "Hello? Is Jose there?" "No," said the voice. No, you call back." It was, I realized, the frightened-looking Asian guy in safety goggles and rubber gloves who ran the floor waxer and managed the trash and did other jobs around the building. The doorman, who didn't appear to know his name any more than I did, called him the new guy, and griped about management bringing in a houseman who spoke neither English nor Spanish. Everything that went wrong in the building they blamed on him. The new guy didn't shovel the walks right. The new guy didn't put the mail where it was supposed to go or keep the courtyard clean like he should. "You call back later," the new guy was saying, hopefully. "No, wait," and he was about to hang up. "I need to talk to somebody." Confused pause. "Please, is anybody else there?" I said. "It's an emergency." "Okay," said the voice warily in an open-ended tone that gave me hope. I could hear him breathing hard in the silence. "This is Theo Decker," I said, "in 7C. I see you downstairs a lot. My mother hasn't come home, and I don't know what to do." Long, bewildered pause. 7, he repeated, as if it were the only part of the sentence he understood. "My mother," I repeated. "Where's Carlos? Isn't anybody there?" "Sorry, thank you," he said with panicky tone and hung up. I hung up the phone myself in a state of high agitation, and after a few moments standing frozen in the middle of the living room, went and switched on the television. The city was a mess. The bridges to the outer borough were closed, which explained why Carlos and Jose hadn't been able to get to work. But I saw nothing at all that made me understand what might be holding my mother up. There was a number to call, I saw, if somebody was missing. I copied it down on a scrap of newspaper and made a deal with myself that if she wasn't home in exactly half an hour, I would call. Writing the number down made me feel better. For some reason, I felt sure that the act of writing down was going to magically make her walk through the door. But after 45 minutes passed, and then an hour, and still she hadn't turned up, I finally broke down and called it, pacing back and forth, keeping a nervous eye on the television the whole time I was waiting for somebody to pick up. The whole time I was on hold, commercials for mattresses, commercials for stereos, fast free delivery, no credit required. Finally, a brisk woman came on, all business. She took my mother's name, took my phone number, and said my mother wasn't on her list, but I would get a call back if her name turned up. Not until after I hung up on the phone did it occur to me to ask what sort of list she was talking about. And after an indefinite period of misgiving, walking in tormented circuit through all 4 rooms, opening drawers, picking up books and putting them down, turning on my mother's computer and seeing what I could figure out from a Google search, nothing. I called back, asking again. "She's not listed among the dead," said the second woman I spoke to, sounding oddly casual, "or the injured." "I'm saying we've got no information at all. Did you leave your number earlier so we can give you a call back?" "Yes," I said. "They had told me I would get a call back. Free delivery and setup," the television was saying. Be sure and ask about 6 months free financing." "Good luck then," said the woman and hung up. The stillness in the apartment was unnatural. Even the loud talking on the television didn't drive it away. 21 people were dead, with dozens more injured. In vain, I tried to reassure myself with this number. 21 people wasn't so bad, was it? 21 was a thin crowd in a movie theater or even on a bus. It was 3 people less than my English class. But soon fresh doubts and fears began to crowd around me, and it was all I could do not to turn out of the apartment yelling her name. As much as I wanted to go out on the street and look for her, I knew I was supposed to stay put. We were supposed to meet at the apartment. That was the deal, the ironclad agreement ever since elementary school, when I had been sent home from school with a disaster preparedness activity book, featuring cartoon ants in dust masks gathering supplies and preparing for some unnamed emergency. I'd completed the crosswords and dim questions. What is the best clothing to pack in a disaster supply kit? A bathing suit? Layers? Hula skirt? A, a bathing suit. B, layers. C, hula skirt. D, aluminum foil. And with my mother, devised a family disaster plan. Ours was simple. We would meet at home. And if one of us couldn't get home, we would call. But as time crawled by and the phone did not ring and the death toll on the news rose to 22 and then 25, I phoned the city's emergency number again. "Yes," said the woman who answered, with an infuriatingly calm voice. "I see here that you phoned in already. We've got her down on our list. But maybe she's in the hospital or something?" "She might be. I'm afraid I can't confirm that, though. What did you say your name was? Would you like to speak to one of our counselors? What hospital are they taking people to? I'm sorry, I really can't. Beth Israel? Lenox Hill? Look, it depends on the type of injury. People have got eye trauma, burns, all sorts of stuff. There are people undergoing surgery all over the city." "What about those people who were reported dead a few minutes ago? Look, I understand. I'd like to help you, but I'm afraid that there's no Audrey Decker on my list." My eyes darted nervously around the living room. My mother's book, Jane and Prudence, Barbara Pym, face down on the back of the sofa, one of her thin cashmere cardigans over the arm of a chair. She had them in all colors. This one was pale blue. Maybe you should come down to the armory. They've set up something for families there. There's food, a lot of hot coffee, and people to talk to." "But what I'm asking you, are there any dead people that you don't have names for, or injured people? Listen, I understand your concern. I really, really wish I could help you with this, but I just can't. You'll get a call back as soon as we have some specific information. I need you to find my mother, please. She's probably in a hospital somewhere. Can't you give me some idea where to look for her?" "How old are you?" said the woman suspiciously. After a shocked silence, I hung up. A few dazed moments, I stared at the telephone, feeling relieved but also guilty, as if I'd knocked something over and broken it. When I looked down at my hands, I saw them shaking. It struck me in a wholly impersonal way, like noticing the battery was drained on my iPad, on my iPod. That I hadn't eaten in a while. Never in my life, except when I had a stomach virus, had I gone so long without food. So I went to the fridge and found my carton of leftover lo mein from the night before and wolfed it at the counter, standing vulnerable and exposed in the glare from the overhead bulb. Though there was also egg foo young and rice, I left it for her, in case she was hungry when she came in. It was nearly midnight. Soon it would be too late for her to order in from the deli. After I was finished, I washed my fork and the coffee things from the morning, and I wiped down the counter so she wouldn't have anything to do when she got home. She would be pleased. I told myself firmly when she saw I had cleaned the kitchen for her. She would be pleased too, at least I thought so, when she saw I'd saved her painting. She might be mad, but I could explain. According to the television, they now knew who was responsible for the explosion. Parties that the news was alternately calling right-wing extremists or homegrown terrorists. They had worked with a moving and storage company with help from unknown accomplices inside the museum. They had concealed the explosives within the hollow carpenter-built display platforms in the museum shop where the postcard and art books were stacked. Some of the perpetrators were dead, some of them were in custody, others were at large. They were going into the particulars in some details, but it was all too much for me to take in. I was now working with the sticky drawers in this kitchen, which had been jammed shut since long before my father left. Nothing was in it but cookie cutters and some old fondue skewers, lemon zesters we never used. She'd been trying for well over a year to get someone from the building in to fix it, along with a broken doorknob and a leaky faucet and half a dozen other annoying little things. I got a butter knife, pried at the edges of her drawer, careful not to chip the paint any more than it was chipped already. The force of the explosion still rang deep in my bones, an inner echo of the ringing in my ears, but worse than this, I could still smell blood, taste the salt and tin of it in my mouth. I would be smelling it for days, though I didn't know that then. While I walked and worried at the drawer, I wondered if I should call somebody, and if so, who? My mother was an only child, and though technically I had a set of living grandparents, my father's dad and stepmother in Maryland, I didn't know how to get in touch with them. Relations were barely civil between my dad and his stepmother, Dorothy, an immigrant from East Germany who had cleaned office buildings for a living before marrying my grandfather. Always a clever mimic, my dad did cruelly funny imitations of Dorothy, a sort of battery-operated housefrau, all compressed lips and jerky movements, and an accent like Kurt Jurgens in Battle of Britain. And though my dad disliked Dorothy enough, his chief enmity was my Grandpa Decker, a tall, fat, frightening-looking man with ruddy cheeks and black hair, died, I think, who wore a lot of waistcoats and loud plaids and believed in belt beatings for children. No picnic was a primary phrase I associated with Grandpa Decker, as in my dad saying, living with that bastard was no picnic. And believe me, dinner time was never any picnic at our house. I had met Grandpa Decker and Dorothy only twice in my life. Tense charged occasions when my mother leaned forward on the sofa with her coat on and her purse in her lap, and her valiant effort to make conversation all stumbled and sank into quicksand. The main thing I remembered were the forced smiles, the heavy smell of cherry pipe tobacco, and Grandpa Decker's not very friendly warning to keep my sticky little mitts off his model train set, an Alpine Village, which took up an entire room of their house, and according to him was worth tens of thousands of dollars. I'd managed to bend the blade of the butter knife by stabbing it too hard into the side of the stuck drawer, one of my mother's few good knives, a silver knife that had belonged to her mother. Gamely, I tried to bend it back, biting my lip and concentrating all my will on the task, but all the time ugly flashes of the day kept flying up and hitting me in the face. Trying to stop thinking about it was like trying to stop thinking of a purple cow. The purple cow was all you could think of. Unexpectedly, the drawer popped open. I stared down at the mess: rusty batteries, a broken cheese grater, a snowflake cookie cutter my mother hadn't used since I was in first grade, jammed in the ragged old carry-out menus from Vienne Chou Li Palace and Delmonico's. I left the drawer wide open, so it would be the first thing she saw when she walked in, and wandered over to the couch and wrapped myself in a blanket, propped up so I could keep a good eye on the front door. My mind was churning in circles. For a long time I sat shivering, red-eyed in the glow of the television as the blue shadows flickered uneasily in and out. There was no news, really. All right. That's my cue to go.